London, in the quiet corridors of Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere is heavier than ever. At 76, King Charles III is facing a silent but cruel enemy, the terrible cancer that is draining his strength day by day. Time, for him, is no longer a distant concept but an hourglass that is shedding its last grains of sand. However, besides the physical pain, there is an invisible wound that is even more painful: the distance from his two young grandchildren Archie and Lilibet, the innocent faces that he has hardly had the chance to hold since the day they were born. It is a void that even the throne cannot fill, a source close to the royal family shared. According to revelations from a palace insider, Charles personally called his son Harry, his voice trembling and urgent. "Bring the children to London, before I don't have a chance to say goodbye." Since Harry and Meghan Markle left the royal family and chose a private life in Montecito, California, the geographical and emotional distance between the two sides has widened. Meghan has remained steadfast in her opinion: the palace environment is toxic and unsuitable for Archie and Lilibet. She fears that, with just one step into the royal family, all the controversy and scrutiny of the media will swallow up her children's childhood. But for Charles, every day that passes is a day of loss. He is heartbroken at the thought of leaving this world without ever being able to tell Archie stories about his ancestors, or see Lilibet giggling in the palace garden, the place that nurtured the childhoods of many generations of princes and princesses. A longtime friend of the king revealed, he is not afraid of death, but he is afraid of oblivion. He is afraid that, when he is gone, in the memories of the two children, there will be no more of him. Now, in the midst of his battle with illness, Charles is not only fighting for his breath, but also for one last chance to be close to his own blood. Can the cold wall between the royal family and the Sussexes be broken down before fate has its final say? In recent days, the image of Charles III appearing in public has become rarer than ever. When forced to appear, he often hides his fatigue behind forced smiles and polite greetings. However, according to sources, behind closed doors, the king returns to the harsh reality of long sleepless nights, where he tosses and turns thinking about the two grandchildren who never really knew him. In private conversations with close advisors, Charles is said to have repeatedly expressed his desire to be a real grandfather. Not a grandfather of England, not a royal symbol, but just a normal man who can hold his grandchildren in his arms, tell them bedtime stories, and feel the warmth of family. He once said that he would give up all the ceremony, all the glory, just to have a full day with Archie and Lilibet, a friend of the king revealed. But the reality is harsh: invisible walls built by suspicion, hurt and distance halfway around the world. Meanwhile, Harry, the son who was once expected to be the bridge, is caught between two worlds. On the one hand, he understands his father's longing; on the other, he also has to face pressure from Meghan, who has always been determined to protect her children from what she calls the intrusion of the royal family and the British media. Amid these calculations, Charles's health continues to deteriorate. Doctors close to him say that the time left for the king is running out. Every call, every letter sent from the palace carries an unprecedented urgency, as if every word could be the last. It is rumored that, on a quiet night at Sandringham, Charles wrote a handwritten letter directly to Harry, in which there was no mention of title or responsibility, just 3 short lines: "I miss you. I want to see you. Before it is too late." At Buckingham, every morning began with medical reports sent directly to the king's desk. The cold numbers on his health indicators now became a cruel reminder that time was running out. Charles, although always trying to maintain a calm demeanor in front of his staff and servants, when he returned to his private room, he often sat for a long time by the window, his eyes looking into the distance as if searching for the silhouettes of the two children who had never been close to him. A royal source recounted that, not long ago, when his health became worse after a treatment, Charles told a private doctor, "I am not afraid of death. I am just afraid of leaving when Archie and Lilibet still think I am a stranger." That sentence made the whole room quiet, because it was not just the sadness of a king, but the heart of a grandfather who was robbed of family moments. On the other side of the Atlantic, Harry is said to have received calls from other royals, including Prince William, who rarely interferes in his brother's personal affairs, urging him to bring his children to see their father. However, Meghan has remained firm, worried that the trip will be exploited by the media, turning it into a drama rather than a private reunion. Friends of Charles say he has prepared a cozy room at Clarence House, his former home with Camilla, for Archie and Lilibet. He has personally selected vintage toys, some children's books, and even planted a small flower garden for the grandchildren to play in. He wants them to remember him as a place filled with laughter, not a distant palace, a relative revealed. However, each day that passes without a response from Harry weighs heavily on the king's spirits. His advisors acknowledged that, barring a miracle, the longed-for meeting would likely remain a wish. And if it did, it would mark the saddest chapter in the final days of a king who had spent his life serving, but was powerless to bridge the gap between his own family. It is said that when a man is at the end of his life, all thrones, power and wealth become meaningless. For Charles III, this was never more true than at this moment. On quiet evenings, after the palace had fallen asleep, he would step out onto the balcony, quietly look at the London night sky and wonder if, across the ocean, Archie and Lilibet were sleeping peacefully, knowing that there was someone here who missed them every day. It is rumored that the king recently asked a close friend, also someone with whom Harry still keeps in touch, to pass on a private message. "I don't need a formal ceremony, no need for newspapers. Just a normal afternoon, us and them together." The message, according to the friend, was written in a shaky handwriting, with long pauses as if each word contained a choking pain. In the palace, Camilla, the queen, is said to be the one who always comforts Charles, but she also knows the void that she cannot fill. A source said that Camilla advised Harry to think about the children's feelings later. One day, when they grow up and know that their grandfather wanted to see them but couldn't. That burden will be on them, and on you. Meghan, however, has not changed her mind. She fears that once she sets foot back in London, old wounds will be reopened, and her children will become the focus of an endless media vortex. She doesn't want to gamble with their childhood, a friend of Meghan revealed. Time still passed. Week by week, day by day, Charles' illness progressed one step further. Doctors warned him to stay calm, but for someone living in hopeless waiting, that was the hardest advice to follow. In a rare moment with his close aides, Charles sighed and said something that silenced everyone. "Perhaps I shall have to leave without ever hearing them call me, sir." If this situation does not change, history may record this as one of the greatest regrets of the reign of Charles III, a tragic chapter not about politics, power or war, but simply the story of a grandfather and his last wish.